The Xenological Acclamation Forum was not a place you just wandered into. It was less a building and more a statement, a towering spire of polished obsidian and glowing crystal lattices that pierced the synthetic stratosphere of Cygnus X1's capital station. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet thrum of a dozen different atmospheric processors, each meticulously crafting the perfect cocktail of nitrogen, argon, methane, or sulfur hexafluoride for its designated patrons. It was a place for the galaxy's elite, the movers and shakers, the species who had clawed or thought or synergized their way to the top of the galactic food chain. In a plush alcove overlooking the central demonstration floor, two such elites were enjoying the rarefied air. The first was Cthar of the Vexian Clutch. He was a magnificent and terrifying specimen, standing nearly 3 meters tall, his body a fortress of segmented, iridescent chitin. For powerful arms, each ending in a pincer sharp enough to shear durasteel, were crossed over a chest that could stop a kinetic slug. His posture was one of absolute, unshakable confidence, the kind that comes from evolving on a world where the primary geological feature is other predators. His companion was Xyler, a luminary of the Cygnian technocracy. Xyler was the physical opposite of Cthar. Slender and willowy, his form was almost liquid, contained within a shimmering envirosuit that cycled nutrient gas through his semi-corporeal body. Where Cthar represented the pinnacle of biological force, Xyler was the apex of intellect. His vast, multifaceted mind could process quantum equations faster than a lesser being could blink, and he viewed the universe not as a thing to be conquered, but as a system to be understood, cataloged, and ultimately optimized. The particle distribution in the containment field is suboptimal, Xyler stated, his voice a series of perfectly modulated chimes that emanated from his suit's external speakers. He gestured a translucent tendril toward the massive transparent cylinder dominating the center of the forum. The muon decay is asymmetrical. It will hold, of course, but the inefficiency is aesthetically displeasing. Cthar made a series of clicks and whistles, the Vexian equivalent of a derisive snort. You intellectuals and your aesthetics. As long as it keeps the beast caged until my demonstration, it is sufficient. Strength is the only metric that matters, Xyler. The claw, not the calculation. Their conversation was a familiar one, a debate as old as their respective civilizations. But on one topic, they found a rare and comfortable agreement. It was a subject of shared amusement, a cosmic punchline that never failed to unite the galaxy's disparate powers in a moment of condescending pity. Humanity. Speaking of inefficiencies, Xyler chimed, his focus shifting toward the forum's grand entrance. I believe the designated representative from Terra has arrived. Class 2 species, they call them. A laughable designation. It implies they have somehow mastered their environment. Cthar followed his gaze. The automatic doors slid open, and a creature shuffled in. It was offensively soft. It stood on two flimsy-looking legs, its body covered in a thin, useless layer of pigmented skin, patched here and there with coarse fiber coverings. It had no visible claws, no carapace, no obvious venom sacs or bioelectric projectors. It was a bipedal sac of vulnerable organs, wobbling precariously on a high-gravity station. It looked, to Cthar's practiced eye, like prey. Not even challenging prey. More like a slow-moving, brightly colored grub. Galactic consensus held that humans were a tragicomedy. They hailed from a planet designated Sol 3, officially cataloged as a Class 7 garden world, though this was a clerical error of legendary proportions that no one had bothered to correct. By all rights, they should have been wiped out by their own planet's ecosystem millennia ago. Instead, they had somehow stumbled into space, propelled by sheer, baffling luck and a reproductive cycle that was frankly obscene. They were viewed as galactic toddlers, let loose in the universe's living room, and the prevailing wisdom was to simply humor them, keep them away from anything sharp, and wait for them to inevitably trip over their own feet. This particular human was named Jake. Jake spotted the waiting attendant droid and gave it a small, friendly wave. He was dressed in what his people called business casual, a term that translated to the wider galaxy as insufficiently prepared for literally any eventuality. He wore beige trousers, a blue polo shirt, and comfortable-looking shoes. His face was unremarkable, his hair was a standard brown, and his expression was one of mild, pleasant curiosity. He looked less like an ambassador for a species and more like someone who had gotten lost on his way to a suburban barbecue. As he was escorted toward the designated diplomatic seating area, he passed the alcove where Kthar and Xyler were observing him. "Look at it," Kthar chittered, the sound grating and low. "The flesh is unarmored. A single glancing blow from my secondary pincer would bisect it. How can a species with such profound biological failings even develop tools? It defies logic." "Their tool use is rudimentary," Xyler supplied, his internal sensors cataloging Jake's physiology with detached disdain. "Mostly kinetic and chemical. Their digital architecture is a chaotic mess of competing protocols. And their biology, fascinatingly fragile. Standard atmospheric pressure, narrow temperature tolerance, high susceptibility to radiation. Their skeletal structure is calcium-based." "Calcium? They are walking chalk sticks, Kthar. It is a miracle they can withstand the 1.2 standard G of this station." Jake, feeling the weight of their gazes, turned his head. He smiled. It was a strange expression, a baring of the blunt, pathetic teeth used for masticating plants. To Kthar, it was a gesture of submission. To Xyler, it was a meaningless facial spasm. "Greetings," Jake said, his voice pleasant and even. The universal translator rendered the word with perfect clarity. "Quite the place you've got here. The lighting is lovely." Kthar did not deign to respond. He simply swiveled one of his smaller optic clusters to stare more intently at the human, an unsubtle gesture of intimidation. Xyler, however, couldn't resist. "Human, we were just discussing the inherent paradox of your existence. Your species is a statistical impossibility. A Class II civilization from a world that, by all rights, should harbor nothing more complex than extremophilic bacteria. Can your cognitive framework even process the improbability?" Jake's smile didn't falter. If anything, it widened slightly. "Oh, we get that a lot. People see the paperwork on Earth and get the wrong idea. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, our planet. But the neighbors are interesting." He glanced at Kthar. "Are you the entertainment for tonight? I read the brochure. The Vexian clutch champion. That's you, right? Big fan of your work. The way you dismantled that Krellian sand thresher on Tiberius Prime? Textbook." Kthar was momentarily thrown. Praise was his due, but from this soft thing? It was like being complimented on your hunting prowess by a salad. He clicked his mandibles in confusion. "You have studied Vexian combat doctrine." "A little," Jake said cheerfully. "We have something similar on Earth. We call it wrestling, though we usually do it with crocodiles. Less pincers, more teeth. And they do this thing called a death roll. It's a real mess." He mimed a spinning motion with his hands. "You lose an arm if you're not careful." Xyler's suit emitted a soft buzz of disbelief. He cross-referenced crocodile in the Terran database. The entry was sparse, but the accompanying images were alarming. A heavily armored, semi-aquatic ambush predator. And the humans wrestled with them? For sport? It had to be a mistranslation. A cultural metaphor. "Your attempts at humor are as primitive as your biology, human," Xyler chimed, dismissing the notion. "You should take your seat. The demonstration is about to begin. Try not to faint. The creature's psionic emanations can be overwhelming for fragile minds." "Thanks for the tip," Jake said, giving them a little finger wave. "Break a leg. Or, a carapace. Whatever you guys say." He ambled over to his seat, leaving the two elites in a state of shared bewilderment. "Insolent grub," Kthar eventually muttered, reasserting his composure. "The species is clearly suffering from a collective delusion of competence," Xyler concluded. "A coping mechanism for their own cosmic irrelevance." And with that, they returned their attention to the demonstration floor, dismissing the soft, strange little mammal from their thoughts. It was a mistake they would spend the rest of their lives regretting. The lights in the forum dimmed, focusing all attention on the central cylinder. A sonorous, multi-species announcement echoed through the chamber. "Distinguished guests, the Xenological Acclamation Forum is proud to present a demonstration of martial dominance. From the Class 11 Death World of Kreth, we present the Gloomfawn." A low, guttural growl vibrated through the floor plates. Inside the transparent cylinder, a shape began to resolve from the shadows. It was a nightmare given form. The Gloomfawn was a quadruped, but it moved with a liquid, unsettling grace, like a predator that had evolved in zero gravity. Its skin was the color of a starless night, absorbing all light, and its body was a chaotic assembly of natural weapons. Barbed tentacles writhed from its back. Its mouth was a vertical slit filled with rotating rows of diamond-hard teeth, and its claws were long, curved hooks of black keratin. But its most terrifying weapon was not physical. Note the subtle shimmer in the air around the creature, Xyler explained to a now-silent Cthar, his voice losing its usual condescension and taking on a note of academic reverence. That is the manifestation of its psionic terror field. The Gloomfang does not merely hunt its prey. It projects an aura of pure, unadulterated fear, paralyzing its victims with their own worst nightmares before it even makes a physical attack. It is a weapon against the mind itself. Cthar felt a flicker of it, even through the shielded cylinder. It was a cold, greasy feeling at the base of his cranial ganglion, a primal whisper that told him to run, to hide, that the hunter was here and death was moments away. He suppressed it with practiced discipline. He was Vexian. He was the hunter, always. Tonight, the announcer continued, our own esteemed clutch champion, Cthar of the Vexians, will demonstrate his people's superiority by facing this apex predator in controlled combat. A wave of impressed murmurs washed through the crowd. This was high drama. A Class 11 predator, one of the deadliest organisms cataloged, against a champion from a renowned warrior species. The plan was simple. A secondary, larger containment field would activate around the arena. The cylinder would retract, releasing the Gloomfang. Cthar would then enter the arena and subdue the beast, showcasing his strength and the effectiveness of his natural Vexian weaponry. It was a demonstration he had performed a dozen times with lesser creatures. But this time, something was different. As the secondary field began to energize, its projector nodes glowing a bright, steady blue, one of them flickered. It sputtered, coughed a plume of acrid smoke, and went dark. A chain reaction sparked along the crystalline conduits. Alarms began to blare, high-pitched and frantic. Field integrity at 70%, a frantic droid voice shrieked. 50, 20. The blue shimmer of the secondary arena field collapsed, vanishing with a sound like shattering glass. And at that exact moment, the primary cylinder, following its programming, retracted into the floor. The Gloomfang was free. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The creature stood in the center of the forum, its multifaceted eyes blinking in the sudden freedom. It tasted the air, its head swaying back and forth. Then, it unleashed its full power. It was not a sound. It was a psychic tsunami. A wave of pure, distilled terror washed over the assembled audience. It was the feeling of being buried alive, of falling from a great height, of being stalked in the dark by something with too many teeth. It was the absolute, cellular certainty of your own imminent and painful death. The forum erupted into chaos. Elite dignitaries, warriors, and intellectuals who controlled star systems and commanded fleets were reduced to screaming, panicked animals. A hulking Grorn ambassador, a creature made of living rock, literally crumbled into a pile of terrified gravel. A delegation of methane-breathing Clithians burst their own environment suits in a desperate, suicidal attempt to flee. It was a cosmic garage sale of anxiety. Xyler felt his semi-corporeal form begin to dissipate, his consciousness fracturing under the psychic load. The terror field wasn't just a feeling. It was a weapon that attacked the very patterns of thought. He was experiencing the heat death of the universe, the collapse of all logic, the final, screaming void of unmeaning. His suit's emergency protocols kicked in, flooding his system with stabilizers, but it was like using a paper cup to bail out an ocean. Cthar fared little better. He, the clutch champion, the pinnacle of Vexian might, was frozen solid. His four mighty arms, capable of rending ships, were locked at his sides. His mind, trained for combat and bloodshed, was a slideshow of horror. He wasn't on the station anymore. He was a hatchling again, hiding from the Sky Reavers on his homeworld, small and weak and helpless. The Gloomfang's power had bypassed his discipline and seized his primal lizard brain. He was no longer a warrior. He was meat. The Gloomfang took a step, then another, its head swiveling to savor the banquet of fear it had created. It was the undisputed master of this space. Every being here was its prey, except one. In the midst of the shrieking, the crumbling, and the psychic meltdowns, Jake sat in his chair, one leg crossed casually over the other. He took a slow, deliberate sip of the complementary nutrient paste he'd been given. It tasted vaguely of mango and regret. He watched the Gloomfang pad across the floor, his expression not of terror, but of mild annoyance, like he was watching someone let their dog off its leash in a public park. He turned to the quivering, dissipating form of Xyler next to him. "Huh," Jake said, his voice a preposterous island of calm in the ocean of panic. "Big fella, isn't he? Reminds me of a Tuesday back at the kindergarten." Xyler, in the sliver of his mind that was still capable of coherent thought, couldn't process the words. Kindergarten? Was that a Terran term for a torture dimension? A psychic crucible where they train their young? The Gloomfang's head snapped in their direction. It had sensed the anomaly, a mind that was not screaming, a consciousness that was not broadcasting a symphony of terror. It was a discordant note in its perfect orchestra of fear. The creature's vertical mouth curled into what could only be a snarl of offense. It fixed its multifaceted gaze on the small, soft creature in the chair. It took another step, focusing its terror field into a concentrated beam, aimed directly at the human. The air around Jake thickened, warping like heat haze. For any other being, it would have been like having a star collapse inside their skull. Jake blinked. He felt a faint pressure behind his eyes, a slight headache. "Ugh," he muttered. "Feels like tax season." He sighed, a long, put-upon sound. He carefully placed his drink on the floor beside his chair. Then, with the unhurried movements of a man about to go unclog a toilet, he stood up. He looked at the chaos around him, at the paralyzed Vexian warrior and the mentally imploding Signian intellectual. "Okay," he said to no one in particular. "I guess we're doing this." He looked around, his eyes scanning the opulent decor. He spotted a nearby catering station, overturned in the panic. He walked over, stepping calmly over a fainted Rigelian dignitary. He ignored the priceless alien artifacts and focused on the practical items. He picked up a large, circular serving tray made of some kind of polished, resonant metal. He hefted it. It had a nice weight. Then, he grabbed a heavy, silk-like tablecloth from the floor. Armed with a tray and a tablecloth, Jake turned to face the Class 11 apex predator. The Gloomfang tilted its head. This was wrong. This was all wrong. Prey ran. Prey screamed. Prey froze. Prey did not arm itself with dining accessories. It let out a low growl, a warning. "I am your end. I am the fear in the dark. Your sanity is a fragile thing, and I am here to break it." Jake just started walking towards it. The aliens who were still semi-conscious watched, their terror momentarily replaced by utter bafflement. Was this a ritual of suicide? An offering? Some bizarrely inappropriate diplomatic gesture? The Gloomfang, insulted by this lack of proper screaming, decided to end it. It lowered its head and charged, a silent, shadowy blur of death. It was faster than a maglev train, a force of nature about to collide with a piece of flimsy, fleshy biology. Jake didn't dodge. He didn't flinch. He didn't even brace for impact. Just as the creature's horrifying maw was about to close over him, he swung the serving tray like a giant metal frisbee. Clank. The sound was shockingly, absurdly loud in the suddenly quieted forum. The tray, made of a vibration-dampening alloy meant to keep wine glasses from rattling, connected squarely with the Gloomfang's sensitive snout. It wasn't a powerful blow, not by Cthulhu's standards. It was just annoying, and loud, and completely unexpected. The Gloomfang staggered back, shaking its head, its multi-spectrum eyes blinking in confusion. The psychic assault faltered for a second. In that single second of disorientation, Jake moved. With a flick of his wrists, he unfurled the tablecloth. It wasn't a panicked throw, it was a practiced, perfect movement, like a matador executing a flawless Veronica. The heavy fabric billowed out and settled directly over the Gloomfang's entire head and upper torso. The effect was instantaneous. The Gloomfang, a creature that perceived the world through a complex matrix of optical sensors, psychic resonance, and ambient energy detection, was suddenly plunged into a world of pure sensory deprivation. It was blind. It was deaf. Its psionic field, which relied on line of sight and a clear mental connection, slammed into a wall of inert, non-sentient fabric. The creature went absolutely berserk. It thrashed and roared, this time with a real, physical voice that sounded like grinding rocks. It clawed at the cloth, but its long, curved talons, designed for slicing flesh, were ill-suited for gripping fabric. It was like trying to knit with scythes. The remaining conscious onlookers could not believe what they were seeing. The nightmare from a Class 11 death world, the Eater of Minds, was being defeated by laundry. But Jake wasn't finished. While the beast was flailing, blinded and confused, Jake walked calmly up to its side. He didn't attack the thrashing claws or the gnashing teeth. He ignored the dozens of obvious, terrifying weapons. His eyes were focused on a small, almost imperceptible spot just behind the creature's massive jaw hinge, a place where the dark skin pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light. He reached out, not with a fist, but with his thumb. He pressed. It wasn't a hard press. It was a firm, targeted pressure applied with an unnerving degree of precision. The Gloomfang ceased. Its entire body went rigid. The thrashing stopped. The roaring cut off into a strangled gurgle. Its limbs locked, its barbed tentacles went stiff, and a low, electronic-sounding whine escaped its throat. Its body began to vibrate, and then, with a final, full-body shudder, it collapsed onto the polished floor. It lay there, twitching and spasming, its eyes wide and vacant beneath the tablecloth. It was completely paralyzed. A silence fell over the xenological acclamation forum. It was a new kind of silence, not the hush of anticipation or the pause of terror. It was a deep, profound, galaxy-shattering silence of absolute, unequivocal disbelief. Jake took a step back, dusting off his hands on his beige trousers. He looked down at the neutralized apex predator. He nudged it with the toe of his shoe. It just whimpered. He turned, walked back to his chair, calmly picked up his nutrient paste, and took another sip. Every eye, from the semi-corporeal to the multifaceted, was on him. The psionic terror that had crippled the room was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of something far, far worse, confusion. Thar was the first to recover. The Gloomfang's psychic attack had vanished, and his warrior's mind rebooted. But the data it was receiving made no sense. The threat was neutralized. The Vexian champion was paralyzed in shame, and the small, soft, grub-like creature was sipping a drink. He lowered his arms, his massive pincers feeling clumsy and useless. He took a step, then another, his movement stiff. How? The word came out as a dry rasp, all his booming authority gone. It sounded like a deflating balloon. What? The terror fueled my training, it did nothing. Xyler was slowly recoalescing. His suit's diagnostics were running wild, trying to explain how his mind, a thing of pure logic, had been turned into scrambled data by the beast, while the primitive human's brain had apparently treated it as a minor inconvenience. The psionic harmonics, Xyler chimed, his voice weak and tinny. They should have deconstructed your synaptic pathways. Your species has no documented psychic shielding, no cranial plating, no biological defense. Jake finished his drink and set the empty container down. He looked at the two shattered elites, then at the other gawking aliens, and sighed the sigh of a man who has had to explain this far too many times. You guys really need to update your files on Earth, he said, his tone patient and conversational, the tone of a teacher explaining long division to a struggling student. The psionic terror field, he began, making air quotes with his fingers. You want to know why it didn't work on me? Let me ask you something. Do you have a mortgage? Thar and Xyler just stared. The translator offered the closest equivalent, a binding, long-term debt obligation for a domicile, carrying the threat of forfeiture upon non-payment. The concept was barbaric. No? Okay. How about student loans? Or a monthly performance review with a boss who micromanages your every move? Ever had to argue with an insurance company? Ever spent 6 hours trying to assemble a piece of furniture with instructions written in pictograms by a madman? He gestured vaguely at the paralyzed Gloomfang. That thing's terror field is a single, pure note of fear. It's clean. It's simple. I'm going to eat you. A human brain isn't built for that. A human brain is a chaotic hellscape of low-grade, chronic, multi-layered anxiety. My brain is constantly running a dozen different terror subroutines at the same time. I'm worried about my cholesterol, whether I offended my aunt at that holiday dinner, global climate change, and whether I left the oven on. He leaned forward, as if sharing a secret. Your apex predator was trying to play one note. My mind is already a full orchestra of panic, playing a dozen different symphonies of dread at once. Trying to add one more note of fear to a human brain is like trying to add a single drop of water to a hurricane. We don't even notice. It's just background noise. Kthar's mandibles hung open. Xyler's form flickered violently. But its speed, its strength. It is a Class 11 predator. Kthar stammered. Right, Class 11, Jake said, nodding. On your scale? Your scale is broken. You guys classified Earth as a Class 7, right? A garden world, he let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. Earth is not a garden. Earth is a gladiator pit. Earth is a Class 12 death world that broke your measuring stick. You guys live on planets where the food chain is a neat, orderly pyramid. On Earth, the food chain is a tangled, chaotic, all-you-can-eat death mosh pit where everything is trying to kill, poison, infect, or parasitize everything else, all at the same time. He started ticking things off on his fingers. You have big predators, I get it. We have bears. A bear is a 10-foot-tall mountain of muscle and fury that can outrun a horse, climb a tree faster than a monkey, and will eat you just because you smell interesting. We also have sharks, which are basically torpedoes made of teeth. And we, the soft, squishy humans, we go swimming with them. For fun. We call it tourism. We have creatures so venomous that a single drop of their poison can kill 100 adult males before they even realize they've been bitten. We have insects that drink blood, plants that eat insects, and fungi that hijack an insect's brain and pilot its body around like a zombie. We have viruses, bacteria, and prion. Things you can't even see, that can turn you inside out in a week. Our planet's weather tries to kill us with hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, and droughts. The ground itself tries to kill us with earthquakes and volcanoes. Everything is trying to kill us, all the time. The Gloomfang is just another monster. To us, a monster is just a Tuesday. He picked up the tablecloth. This wasn't some grand strategy. This is basic problem solving. The creature sees, hears, and feels psionically. So you take away its senses. It's overstimulated. What do you do with an overstimulated toddler who won't stop screaming? You put them in a quiet room, or you give them a blanket. It's called a sensory break. I've done it 1,000 times with 5-year-olds who've had too much sugar. This thing is just a bigger, uglier toddler. He then pointed at the spot on the creature's neck where he'd jabbed it. And that's not some secret human martial art. Every complex nervous system has fail-safes. Junction points. You call them nerve clusters, we call them pressure points. On Earth, if you don't learn where the off switch is on the local wildlife, you don't get to have children. We have these 8-legged nightmares called spiders. Some of them can kill you. You learn very, very fast where to poke them to make them curl up and play dead. This thing, he gestured to the Gloomfang, is just a very big spider with a very obvious off switch. A heavy silence descended once more. The pieces were slotting into place in the aliens' minds, forming a picture of utter, absolute horror. They had not been dealing with a primitive. They had been dealing with a survivor from hell. Your profession, human Jake, Xyler managed to chime, his logic circuits trying to find some anchor in this sea of madness. You are a warrior? A special forces operative? A xeno-exterminator? Jake looked at him, a genuinely puzzled expression on his face. Me? No. Goodness, no. I'm a kindergarten teacher. If the forum had been silent before, it was now a vacuum. The concept, when translated, was an educator for the species' youngest, most vulnerable offspring during their initial developmental stage. Jake saw their confusion and decided to elaborate, which was the worst possible thing he could have done. Honestly, he said, a weary resignation in his voice. This was relaxing. A Gloomfang is predictable. It wants to kill you and eat you. It's honest. You spend a day with 25 human 5-year-olds. That's real chaos. That's real terror. They are tiny, sociopathic, biological weapons. They have no impulse control. Their reasoning is nonlinear, and they are masters of psychological warfare. One of them, little Sarah, figured out how to weaponize glitter. Glitter. Do you have any idea how to clean up a glitter-based detonation? You can't. You just have to move and sell the building. He shook his head, a distant, haunted look in his eyes. And Timmy. He learned to bite. And then he taught the others. For a week, it was like running a school for miniature land sharks. He gestured again to the quivering heap on the floor. This was a negotiation. My kindergarten class. That's a hostage crisis. Every single day, Kthar, the Vexian clutch champion, the being of chitin and might, looked at his own massive, deadly pincers. Then he looked at Jake's soft, fleshy, ridiculously fragile-looking hands. The hands of a teacher. The hands that had just disabled an apex predator with a thumb. He felt his chitinous plates, his biological armor, his species' entire evolutionary pride, suddenly feel as thin and useless as paper. He had an image of this Jake, this soft creature, calmly explaining the color blue to 25 things more terrifying than the Gloomfawn. Kthar felt a new kind of fear. It wasn't the clean, primal fear from the Gloomfawn. It was a cold, intellectual, existential dread. It was the realization that he was not at the top of the food chain. He was not even in the same league. He was a bug, and he had just been watching a god swat a fly. Xyler, the luminary, the being of pure intellect, was having a similar crisis. His entire worldview, a carefully constructed edifice of logic and classification, had been demolished. He had dismissed humanity as a statistical error. He now understood. Humanity wasn't a statistical error. They were a statistical outlier. A data point so far off the chart that it implied the chart itself was meaningless. They weren't class 2. They weren't class 12. They were a new category entirely, one for which he had no name. The label that came to his mind was simply, warning. He frantically accessed his datapad, attempting to file a new planetary report for Sol 3. He tried to upgrade its classification from Class 7 to Class 12. The system rejected it. He tried to override it. A warning message flashed on his screen. Classification exceeds maximum threat parameters. Are you sure you wish to proceed? He tried again. His datapad began to smoke, its processors unable to reconcile the existence of a world where kindergarten teacher was a more hazardous profession than apex predator hunter. Jake checked the time on his wrist communicator. Well, that was a fun evening. Glad I could help out. He stood up and stretched, his joints popping softly. I've really got to go, though. Big day tomorrow. Kthar, his voice a barely audible whisper, asked, You are going to wrestle a crocodile. Worse, Jake said, his expression turning genuinely serious for the first time all night. He looked Kthar dead in the eye. Parent-teacher conferences. He gave a small, friendly wave to the room of petrified elites and walked calmly toward the exit, his soft shoes making almost no sound on the floor. The door slid open, and he was gone. He left behind a paralyzed monster, a broken warrior, a shattered intellectual, and a room full of the galaxy's most powerful beings staring in silent, abject terror at the empty space where the primitive had just stood, each of them contemplating the horrifying, universe-altering implications of what a human considered to be a difficult day at the office.